From one comes two and many. In this section, I will continue building the conceptual model of how the universe emerged using the basic understanding of the firmament that we now have. Where possible, I will put you in the driver's seat as the creative director of the developing universe, so I'm hoping this might be a bit of fun as well as informative. We can play this game because the creative process is a universal phenomenon, not just a human one, as we have already discussed. Although an entirely new description of how the universe came to be will emerge from the ideas put forward here, this information is secondary in importance. The primary purpose of this section is to introduce further important concepts and relationships that might help you better understand what you are involved in as a human being living on planet Earth. Before we return to science as the source to develop this understanding further, let's first recap what we have established to date. We have discovered that consciousness is all there is, and all things arise from and within it. Consciousness has attributes that we can all sense and relate to because what we are essentially is consciousness. Intention is an attribute of consciousness and arises to attract attention to it as an equal and opposite reaction. It is where these two energies meet that definable events occur. The first event in the beginning was the formation of the firmament, the foundation of existence, and the basic structure that supports all other creation. Light and gravity are generated as a function of the eternal expansion-contraction movement of energy that forms and expresses itself as the firmament. Mass and energy are related by the speed of light, which is the measure of the movement of consciousness here in this earthly realm. Anything that appears in the physical world appears simultaneously as knowledge in the world of mind. Mind is the inseparable other side of matter, and both are functions of consciousness. Intelligence is a universal phenomenon. It is the interplay, the movement of consciousness between mind and matter. The intellect is a human attribute only and relates to the interaction between consciousness and the brain. So, in the beginning, the first manifestation and reality of the universe was the existence of the firmament. There were no stars or planets because they had not yet been discovered, and there were no amoeba, birds or bees because the idea of such life forms had not yet been formulated, let alone materialized as physical objects. Therefore, as the creative consciousness responsible for the next step, what might you choose to do? What could you choose to do? Remember, the only knowledge you have at this point is the experience of what has been created so far, the firmament. So your options are extremely limited. You are an all-powerful, unlimited potential, but you don't know very much yet. All you could do would be one of three things. You could, 1, remain as you are, as the one and only firmament in the universe. And if you did, nothing else would have happened. Or 2, you could cease the intention to be all that you can, and the firmament structure would immediately dismantle, explode, to return to the formless stillness that preceded its existence, in which case again nothing further would happen. Or 3, you could reproduce yourself as the firmament that you know you are. Logically, we must conclude that this is in fact what consciousness did because development obviously continued. Another firmament now appeared in the same way in which a parent cell divides into two daughter cells, as it is said in biological terms. This is the outer appearance of the inner intention, and now there were two. But how did this happen? What exactly was the mechanism that consciousness used to achieve this? We might also ask, how does a cell divide? And the answer is that nobody knows for sure. It just does. However, there is an answer, and the explanation of this most fundamental act of reproduction is both intriguing and extremely valuable for us to know, as it describes a great power that you, as a creative being, can channel. The way in which another firmament appeared was simply the externalization of existing knowledge. It was the psychic mechanism of consciousness at work, and the second firmament appeared because of the intention for it to do so. It was attention to the intention that brought it into existence. The implications of the existence of two are many, each of which is deeply significant and provides us with the opportunity to understand the fundamental nature of relationship in its most basic form. First, there was now a sense of other in that consciousness could now see itself as the firmament that it was from the perspective of the first. To say it like that is perhaps a little misleading, because there were, of course, no eyes there to do any seeing. The situation was an energetic seeing, something we might refer to today as an inner knowing of the total situation at hand. Second, the existence of these two firmaments as the whole and only reality at the time brought about the notion and sense of here and there for the first time. From either perspective, the other was over there, somewhere else, but separate from the observing firmament. This separation was effectively a distance between them as 2 points in space, and since distance is something that indicates dimension, it is this emergence of other that marks the beginning of the awareness of space-time, the environment in which consciousness would play. Although these two firmaments were identical in structure and in nature, it is important to note that they were still of the same consciousness that created them. Accordingly, they existed as two conscious entities, born of the same source, yet each with creative potential and power of their own, and in this sense a better name for them might be beings. However, since this term is generally associated with living creatures, especially the likes of humans, it doesn't fit so well to use it at this stage. Nonetheless, the reality of a being is no different from that of a firmament. It is a creative, intelligent focal point and potential generated by the movement of consciousness. The universal knowledge of two could or would, and eventually, or perhaps even immediately, did become the existence of many. Let me explain. Considering the emergence of another firmament, this emerging must have occurred somewhere within the first firmament, because that was the only thing at the time. Logically, one might now ask, where within did this new firmament appear? And this is an impossible question for us to answer, because where might something appear in a reality that is infinite and without dimension? What we can deduce from this is that in fact every place within itself represented the opportunity for another firmament to emerge, and therefore it can be said that every place could eventually, or even immediately, exist as another firmament, a classic case of quantum superposition. Taking the extreme possibility of every point being a firmament, then this effectively describes the original firmament as being one infinite-sized thing consisting of an infinite number of these same things at every possible place within itself. A good way to get a sense of this condition might be to fuse together two other concepts. Consider the reality of the ocean. The ocean is the whole, and there can be no disputing that it is one body of water. If we now take a jugful of this water that constitutes the ocean and pour it out as slowly as possible, it will deliver itself in the form of the tiniest packages, that is, drops. In this analogy, there is nothing smaller than a drop of water and nothing larger than the ocean itself. For these reasons, we could describe the ocean as one body of water or a vast number of drops that make up that body of water. Both would be correct. However, this analogy alone is not sufficient to describe the actual reality of the situation. The second concept we need to consider is the notion of fractals. A fractal is a never-ending pattern that is self-similar at every scale. It is like worlds within worlds, an eternal revealing of the same thing. Please see figure F in this section. If you look at the whole picture of the triangle, you can see that there are 9 identical triangles within it. To look at any one of those triangles is to see that within them are also 9 identical triangles, and to look inside any one of those would be to see the same again. So if you continue to look deeply into it, you experience a never-ending revelation of the same thing. To fuse the concept of fractals with the ocean analogy would be to see that each and every drop itself is an ocean of its own accord, with drops within it, and so on and so on. The reality of this condition is interesting in many ways, not least when it comes to the idea of understanding things by looking into them, as is the scientific reductive way. If this way of looking for answers is not balanced with an understanding of the fact that the very nature of matter is ever revealing, it is something that never ever ends, then it will not ever be possible to clearly grasp what is really going on. Further, not only is the nature of matter ever revealing, but quantum theory also shows us that the very nature of energy is responsive to the observer. When we combine these two pieces of information, it clearly highlights the limitations to what can be gained and what is truly valuable in our quest to understand things by looking deeply into them. It indicates that whatever is seen and discovered through intense experimentation of this nature is more a reflection of what is being sought rather than any substantial or meaningful revelation. To consider and understand the reality of what has just been described, then, would be to see that at any moment each firmament within the one host firmament has specific and unique properties relative to that host. In other words, the quality of the firmament at any given point differs as a function of its distance from the centre of the host. For example, a firmament at the centre has absolute density and mass due to the extreme gravity in this region, and one at the periphery has no mass at all, due to virtually no gravity at all. Therefore, the locus of every point along a line from the centre to the periphery of the host firmament describes fields of specific density, and the firmaments within each field have unique properties accordingly. This gradation of density and the fields generated is indicated in Figure G in this section. The relationship between the firmament as a whole or host and those within it is that firmaments begin to become increasingly defined as having mass the closer they get to the centre, because gravity is acting upon them and restricting their energy movement. This restriction not only increases the mass, it also forces the energy within each firmament that would otherwise be an eternal and simultaneously expansion-contraction state to begin moving back and forth, or, in other words, each firmament at every point begins to pulsate at a specific rate. It is this pulsating energy that gives rise to the notion of energy vibrating, and this vibration is measurable in space-time as wavelength. The gradation of vibrational wavelength from the core to the periphery describes the basis of what we now know and name as the electromagnetic spectrum of energy. The measurable spectrum of this energy ranges from gamma radiation at the higher end down to radio waves at the lower end. See Figure H in this section. Although I have just said that this energy vibration is measurable as wavelength in space-time, it may be more accurate to see that it is something measurable as space-time, because it takes time for energy to move, or even more accurately, the movement of energy is time. And it is this movement that determines and defines space. Of course, the relationship between time and space is now well known, and was first introduced by Albert Einstein in his theory of special relativity. However, to now add to this perspective would be to see that it is vibration that determines the relationship. To demonstrate, the natural and original state of consciousness expanding and contracting simultaneously is one in which there is no vibration. This is the entirety of the universe and the container for all other things. Having no vibration, the reality of this condition describes unlimited space and no time or timelessness. Accordingly, the condition is synonymous with the concept of eternity. At the other end of the spectrum, that of the atomic, are the smallest expressions of consciousness vibrating at the fastest possible rate. The energy movement is so fast that it represents a maximum amount of time, again something approaching eternity, but from the other end, so to speak, yet virtually no space at all. Therefore, there is not much time and a lot of space in slow vibrations, and an extraordinary amount of time, but very little space, in fast vibration. The full range of the electromagnetic spectrum, then, is far greater than what is commonly known and represented in Figure H, and perhaps the slower vibrations would be better referred to as rhythms. These rhythms would have minimal time and a great amount of space, and would represent the firmaments that support the larger celestial bodies. This will be discussed in the upcoming section on the solar system. Considering the idea further, that vibration determines the nature of space-time, would be to gain an insight into the reason for time dilation. Given that any body of mass is an arrangement of firmaments that are vibrating consciousness, then as that body is accelerated towards relativistic, nearing unlimited speed, the motion counteracts the speed of vibration in the matter and effectively slows it down. This, in turn, slows time. These relationships are important to understand and also challenging to describe. With regard to the nature of the firmament, it might be helpful to see that these infinite number of points we're talking about could also be considered as the smallest packages of energy possible. To give them a name would be to call them quanta, not unlike Max Planck did back in the 19th century, and altogether they form as a field of quanta or a quantum field. Quanta are the basic building blocks of creation and represent the most elementary particles that science seeks to find and name. They form the basis of atoms that gather and join to become the molecules that make up matter in the various and myriad forms that appear as the physical world. In the next section, we continue to explore how this universe of ours is made through understanding what exactly constitutes an elementary particle.